Hey everyone, so today I'm sharing a slightly different kind of video. I'm sitting down with my friend and facilitator Namora Lubis to talk about his work facilitating dialogue circles for men. Spaces intended for men to connect more honestly and to begin to set down the mask of masculinity. I wanted to talk with Namora because even though we work in very different contexts, we both see dialogue facilitation as our main form of activism. I facilitate mostly in formal settings, so in schools and workplaces, while Namora facilitates discussion groups and educational workshops mostly outside of institutions like that. I was excited to hear about how they think about their work and how they think about some of the facilitation challenges I spent a lot of time thinking about. First, I asked Namora about a concept they used called good enough facilitation, and I asked what it means to them to be a good enough facilitator. Next, we have a conversation about how we deal with overtalkers, so people in a group that take up a lot of space, which I know is a challenge that many facilitators, myself included, struggle with at times. Finally, I asked Namora how they balance creating a space for men to speak freely while also intervening when sexist or harmful rhetoric comes up. It's that tension between come as you are, tell us what's on your mind, and also I don't want to hold a space that reinforces oppressive ideas. I think this is a conversation that'll be valuable for anyone interested in facilitating dialogue, particularly rooted in justice and liberation. One last thing is that we forgot to film a proper introduction, or really an introduction of any kind. So Namora, can you please say hi?
Hey Marine, this is Namora from my living room speaking to you from the future and telling you that I am very excited to will have had this sit down and talk with you.
Me too. Let's get into it. So I want to ask you about good enough facilitation. The first time I heard you speak those words, good enough facilitation, I was like, I want you to say more about that because I instantly understood what you meant because as facilitators, I think sometimes we get so caught up on like, how do we say things perfectly? How do we keep everybody perfectly safe, but at the same time answer in a way that is like really critical and holds everybody accountable and all these things, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about good enough facilitation and just like your grounding principles in general? Like what does it look like for you to be just good enough?
Yeah. So I'll say, with good enough facilitation, I think there are sort of 5 principles to this, or 5 pillars of good enough facilitation, if you will. And the first pillar and the central pillar for me is to come from love. So as facilitator, I can meet the group, I can get curious, I can sit with them, I can give feedback. But as I do all of this, it's important to come from a place of love and curiosity, rather than wanting to teach or to be right or to save or to show off or to play small. Because again, as facilitator in the room, even though it's just a little bit, I am the only one with hierarchical power. And people will project. They will project power, they will project authority, they will project daddy onto me, right? And sometimes they will try to punish me for the ways in which, power and authority has let them down in their life. And rather than, respond to that or wield that power in a way that is just perpetuating, those dynamics and those beliefs, I can come from love. I can wield, power like a brush, and we can sort of make space for things to start to change. And I'd say the second pillar with good enough facilitation is to keep the space safe. In part, this means keeping people safe from interpersonal drama, like projections and fixing one another, and these things which don't allow people to be with what they're feeling. But it also means keeping people safe from their own drama and the way in which they fall into story or projections or shame to avoid what's really at play. I always work with a set of ground rules which provide a foundation for safety. And the first part of every group is asking everyone, have you all read and do you all consent to the ground rules? And that way we can move forward with consent and hold each other mutually accountable. In fact, one of the ground rules that, one of the last ground rules, which tends to come into play later when people are more familiar, is to live beyond the rules. And that means that the rules act as a nice containing space, but they also don't limit the space. And the third pillar is to respect everyone's time. So as facilitator, we have a duty to, respect other people's time and our own time. So principally for me, what this means is that if you're facilitating a group with an agenda, it means dedicating time and, myself to the extent to which I'm resourced to what's on the agenda, beyond judgments of whether or not this work was done well or not, right? This also means, stepping in when people start to rant, refusing to hold space for people who cannot respect the time of the group, and doing my best to make sure everyone gets a say, right? And in between groups, this responsibility calls me to sit with what comes up for me as I'm facilitating and to learn the lessons that I need to learn. And for me, if I fail to do this, then I risk coming into groups and recreating the same dynamics over and over again, which is, frankly, it's a waste of my time and it's a waste of other people's time. I'd say the fourth pillar of good enough facilitation is to trust that people have the answers, right? The foundation of any type of shared space, I think, is trust. And as facilitator, one of the ways that we demonstrate trust is by trusting those around us to have the answers to their own and each other's questions. Fixing is not part of my job description. And, trust is also about holding space for people to speak their way to their truth, right? For the culture, for the dynamic, for the space of the group to do the work in holding people so that they can speak up, so that they can be heard, and so that they can step forward into new life. And while it can sometimes be helpful for the facilitator to kind of, guide the group with a steady hand, it's not always right to offer people a path that they're not yet ready to see. So many of my best facilitation groups have been where I haven't actually said much. I've just kind of said, the structural questions that I say to hold the space, and people just have a conversation with each other. And what a relief. I just get to kind of lean back and be like, all right, the space is held. I'm doing my job. This is good facilitation. Yeah. And even I've had so many wonderful groups where I've not been okay, and I've come in feeling quite overwhelmed or quite distressed, and being able to name that in the space, and then realizing that actually by virtue of me naming that, that's exactly what people needed to find the common theme, like what's really going on for all of us, And so part of that good enough facilitation and trust is also, trusting the group to hold me if I need to break down. Of course, that's for groups where there's already some rapport where people are familiar with the space. And I'd say the fifth pillar, and maybe the most practical pillar, if you want, for good enough facilitation is to breathe. Because your breath keeps you connected to your body and the present moment. And the present moment is often all we need to start to kind of feel into, where does this group want to go? And who are we, when we're together? Often for me, I know I stop breathing when I feel like something in the present moment isn't safe to be with. And I can go up into my head trying to think my way out, or to do my way out, or to perform my way out of it. But the thing is, if I'm the facilitator and the facilitator isn't breathing, then I'm not connected to myself, which means I cannot be connected to the group, which means that I cannot hold people safe. And so whatever happens, it's important that I stay with my breath so that I know what's going on for me, and then my feelings can be named in the space, and people can sigh. They can have this sigh of relief knowing that I am here and I'm being with things. I'm not bypassing or ignoring or fixing.
Wow. Thanks for that. Yeah, those are 5. I mean, they're tall orders For sure. I mean, for me, even breathing sounds like a tall order, especially when moments are tense, right?
Yeah.
But it also makes facilitation, I think, seem more manageable. Like, yeah, I can read out the ground rules and hold people to them. I can, respect people's time. I can breathe. I can, it's not these like ever shifting goalposts of just like having a perfect reaction, but it's just like, okay, if I'm able to really try to commit to these things that hold my container, then I'm free to show up with whatever I got that day and it'll be good enough. So I think yeah, that's a really good grounding framework for facilitation.
Yeah. And I'll just say again really quickly that, if people are not sure where to start with good enough facilitation, I always say start with breathing. Because
Mm,
if you're not breathing, then you don't know whether or not you're coming from love. If you're not breathing, by virtue of not breathing, that means there's something in the present moment you don't trust.
mhm,
Either you don't trust it, or you don't trust your ability to be with it. And
mhm,
so just always come back to the breath, breathe, and ask, how is this landing for me? I'd say very often, as when I'm facilitating, it can often be that 50% or more of my attention is actually on myself and how am I feeling. Because if I'm breathing, I can trust that I'm a human being, I'm a socially wired animal, and
mhm,
my body actually already has everything I need to feel into the space and know where we want to go.
mhm.
Mm.
So the next scenario I'd love to talk about with you is what do you do when someone is taking up too much space? This is something I used to struggle with a lot as a facilitator, and I know that many of us do. Over time, I found a strategy that's been really helpful, and I've never really heard other facilitators talk about it. So I will share what that is. But first, I'm curious to ask you if you have a go to phrase or a go to strategy that you rely on in moments like this.
Yeah. So in moments like this, I go back to this idea that, as the facilitator of the space, I'm the only one with hierarchical power. Um, and power always comes with responsibility, to quote Spider-Man. And as a facilitator, I am responsible for time, right? And so often I will say something like, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I'm being aware of time and the fact that there are other people who need to speak. Um, or sometimes that there is still just a lot of content that needs to be covered. And I will kind of practice active listening and say, what I'm hearing from you is A, B, and C. Is that right? Um, I once had this person who shall remain unnamed, and he came a few times and he would not shut up. It was unimaginable. It was unbelievable. Like left unchecked, he would ramble for 3 hours without stopping. No exaggeration. There were one of the groups, it was like there were me and two of the other regulars trying to just be like, stop talking as politely as we could muster. And again, coming back to power, I started off by being quite gentle with him and escalating. And I did eventually have to tell him, like, if you cannot respect the time and the attention of the other people in the space, then I have to ban you from this space and, you can't
Wow.
come back. Yeah. But it rarely comes to that. I
Did you
have
have
some
to? In the
regulars.
end?
I did,
Wow.
because he wouldn't get it. Often many times I would say, okay, I want you to take a breath and in a breath, summarize what you're saying. And then he would just go off on another, and he would have to be stopped again. And it wasn't malicious. It was just like a total lack of self-awareness, probably.
Mhm. Mhm.
And for me, going back to what I was saying earlier, that sometimes people who work in anti-oppression can be afraid of wielding power. There's this, I don't know what the right word is, a maxim, and an adage, and it's like, in a tolerant society, you have to be intolerant of intolerance. And
Mhm.
for me, it's not an ethical or a moral statement. It's a social contract, right?
Mhm.
It's like, if you want to be in a space where space is held for you and you are respected, you also need to respect, the space for everyone else. And
Mhm.
if you can't do that, if you can't, fulfill your obligations of the social contract, you are no longer covered by the social contract.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes there are people like that come in and they have to be booted.
Mm-hmm.
But it rarely comes to that. I have some regulars in my work, for example, and I know that they can get very passionate about certain topics and sometimes a bit carried away with their thoughts. And after I've checked them like 2-3 times and they kind of know that they tend to get carried away, I'll sometimes just kind of look at them and silently nod and just be like, and they get the message. They're like, okay, let me wrap this up.
Yeah. The strategy I was talking about is something that you sort of referred to. I started asking people who would offer, the group like a long-winded kind of word salady response instead of, as the facilitator, trying to like catalog everything they had spoken about and finding the right thing to respond to. And because sometimes it can be really hard to just come up with a summarizing statement that encapsulates what the person said. I stop and I
Yeah.
say, like, thank you so much. Do you think that you could repeat back to me what you said in one sentence? Because then it becomes a lot easier to just respond to that one sentence. And when I would try to respond to all the things, first of all, there's a bigger likelihood that you might misportray what the person said, but also maybe you're exerting so much energy trying to respond to something that, like, it wasn't even that important in what the person said and would be omitted from their summary. So yeah, that has really helped me in facilitation. I find that sometimes when people are talking so much as the facilitator, you do have the ability maybe to like close that loop for them. If they have been, like, repeating the story over and over again, maybe repeating it in your group you can respond in a way that allows them to get some sort of closure or some sort of, like, asking them a question that they're not used to being asked in response to sharing that story because everyone's like, "Oh, okay, you keep talking about this," or whatever. So I think
Cool.
that's also a role that we can try to play.
Yeah. Yeah. There have been a couple of moments where sometimes people go on a rant, but sort of manageable rant, and it's a bit all over the place. And sometimes it's clear to me what they're feeling, and sometimes it's not. And often the question I'll ask is, how do you feel now that you've said that?
Mm.
And very often people reply with, yeah, I feel like I really just needed to get that off my chest. I didn't need it to be fixed or to be understood but I just needed to speak it out.
Mm.
And that's a way of meeting it as well.
I love that. How do you feel now that you've said that?
Mm.
Yeah, it comes down to, again, as the facilitator, not thinking you need to have the response, but just, like, always asking the participants to, like, reflect it back and to do the work that you'd be so tempted to step in and do for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. My final question is, what do you do when someone's emotions get misdirected at an entire group of people? And I'm asking because I imagine that this comes up a lot in your setting. Like, you're committed to holding space for men's emotion and honest expression. And at the same time, I imagine that there can be a lot of anger or stereotyping directed at women. And that's what feels almost like scariest to me about the work that you do, inviting that vulnerability while also holding people accountable to what they say. I know that this is a tension I have felt a lot when I've worked in, like, really rich schools, for example. Like, I invite participants to share about their grievances and things like that, but sometimes in their sharing of those, there's definitely things that need to be deconstructed or called out. So, can you share a strategy that you've developed in your practice for holding that tension?
Yeah. So, again, in the kind of spaces that I hold for men, that can definitely be a dynamic, especially as men are kind of reaching this stage where they're sort of starting to reconcile, um, you know, who they are and the choices that they've made in life with the kind of the fear or the pressure they may have felt on women. And sometimes in the people of color spaces for people of color, it can be that I have someone come from a country and they're complaining about another ethnic group in that country. And I can be like, I actually don't know what the dynamic of power is between those two ethnic groups. It might be simple, it might be incredibly complicated. And I also don't necessarily want to be holding space for people to, be what's the word, propagating a rhetoric that is either harmful or that I don't, fully understand.
Mm.
One of the ground rules that I have for all of my spaces is to own what you say. Often that means, as much as possible, to use I statements, right? And there is a real tension that needs to be held, like you said, between allowing people to be vulnerable, to be met with where they are and feel what they're feeling, and also with, refusing to hold space for harmful rhetoric. And for me, the thing with staying with I is that it really helps to hold this tension. Because then, people may be talking and they may be venting about minority groups, or again, they may be venting about dynamics that I don't really understand, but then they're no longer making these general sweeping statements about women or people of color or people who are queer or what have you, right? They are keeping it to their relationship to these groups of people. And that can be true for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can give us an example of, like, what you would say.
Mhm.
To, like, for example, if someone in your men's groups is dealing with something that is really frustrating and they start making, like, sweeping generalizations about how women are crazy or emotional or something like that.
Yeah. So I'm remembering this one incident where a man came into, one of my men's circles, and he was talking quite a lot about how he felt, oh, as men, we feel this pressure to be a certain way and we have to, and if we don't, then women will or will not do this for us,
Mhm.
um, or things like that. And there was a lot of this vocabulary, which was at the same time externalizing responsibility, and also externalizing the outcome. Like, he was not saying that this is having an effect on me. He was saying this is having an effect on us as men.
Mm.
And something that I learned from my mentor to say is that, when you say we, I feel like I'm being weed on. And this is really a sort of a private personal concern, and please keep me out of it.
Wow.
Um, and, we had this talk about, let's come back to the ground rules here. How would it feel for you to say all of that again, but to say I?
Mm.
And then he started, it was a challenge at first, but he started to step into, oh yeah, actually, I feel like I've been shouldering these expectations and these burdens from women all my life, and I'm realizing that it's actually more just my mother, or the women in my family, or the women who I was into when I was in school. And suddenly it's not all women. Suddenly the window has already narrowed.
Mm.
um, and then I could start to ask, okay, well, you're starting to get a lot more clear on this. How does this make you feel, you know And then he realized, oh, this actually isn't about women at all. It's me. I'm feeling resentful. And it's not that I'm feeling resentful towards women, although maybe there is some of that. It's I'm feeling resentful for how I've not been able to stand up for myself. And I felt I need to meet these expectations and do these things to be safe and accepted.
I really like
Mhm.
how you often ask people, like, "How would it feel for you to do this?" "Oh, now how does it feel for you now that you've done that?" I think that's a really great
Yeah.
that's a really great facilitation strategy.
Yeah, yeah. One of the feedbacks that I get very often when I encourage people to say I, and then I ask them, how does it feel now that you've said that? They'll say, oh yeah, when I was saying you or they, it felt like there was this problem, but it was in the corner of the room. And I could point to it as a problem, and I could, be mad about it, but I could also just kind of detach myself from it. And actually, when I say I'm realizing that this problem is mine and I have to take accountability for it.
Mhm. What would you say to people who want to experience more of your facilitation? Where can they find you and where can they learn more about your approach?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to be holding this program starting the 26th of February for 5 weeks. And it's a program on prefigurative politics. It's called Liberatory Livelihoods. And it's all about, how do we start to cultivate a livelihood that gives us security, that gives us dignity, that gives us a sense of purpose in an unjust society.
Mm.
Um, and in the lead up to the course, I'm also going to be holding a webinar, a free webinar on the 12th of February, which is all about how do we start to kind of map and connect to our gift to the web of life. And then,
Mm.
subsequently, the course is going to be about how do we cultivate a livelihood that allows that gift to flourish and to bloom.
Mm. Well, I'll be there. So I definitely look forward to it. And thanks so much for everything that you've brought here today. And to everybody watching, make sure to check out the links to the course and the webinar that Namora talked about if you want to learn more.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks so much, Namora.